There it is. And we're good. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday evening. We're delighted to have you here. My name's McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. And again, I just want to say thank you. This has been an amazing time in our lives, for lack of a better word, a crazy time, a wild time, an unforgettable time. And Tattered Cover is known for being a community-centered place, and we're really trying to bring that back in 2021 as best we can. And right now we're doing that virtually. So while we may not be able to be together as a community space, thank you for joining us in our virtual community. For those of you who may be joining us who are not in the Denver metro area, you may be around the nation or around the world, as we found with some of our events. Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore in the Denver metro area. We have 4 locations in the Denver metro area, and I've said that I think 3 times now, but we're in Denver, and we have 4 locations, all of which right now are actually open, so you can come and visit us safely if you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, and you can come spend about 90 minutes or so with us browsing those bookshelves. But if you're like me and you want to shop in your pajamas and you're not really quite keen on leaving yet, or if you're not in the area, you can always shop online with us at tatteredcover.com, and our website's open 24/7, and you can get yourselves a copy of pretty much nearly any book that you're looking for, new releases, everything, though the book we're talking about today, Yellow Wife. So you can get those at tatteredcover.com or at any one of our locations. I want to let you know about some amazing events that we have coming up. I'm so excited for these amazing lineup of events that we've got. February is Black History Month, and we are kicking off the celebration with wonderful authors such as Rio Cortez. She'll be reading from her book. It's a virtual story time. She'll be reading the ABCs of Black History. That's the title. I know how to read. The ABCs of Black History, and that's going to be Thursday morning, the 4th of February at 10:30 Mountain Time. And you can also check out tickets for Bevy Smith in Conversation with Sherry Shepard on Wednesday, February 3rd at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. You can always check out events at tatteredcover.com/events and see what we have coming up virtually. I want to also let you know that closed captioning is enabled for those who might need it. In order to do that, you only have to toggle your mouse over the screen you're watching me on, and there's a black bar at the bottom. There's a button that says CC on it, and you can click on that for closed captioning if you want it or need it. The last thing, little bit of housekeeping I want to do is I want to say thank you for shopping locally. Tattered Cover's been around now for 50 years, 50, and that's amazing for a bookstore. And that's because of you, our community, and the fact that you continue to shop locally and support your town, support local businesses. We wouldn't be here without you, and we wouldn't be able to have amazing author events and star wonderful authors like the one that we have today. And so I want to tell you a little bit about our author, Sadeqa Johnson. She is the award-winning author of 4 novels. Her accolades include the National Book Club Award, the Phyllis Wheatley Book Award, and the USA Best Book Award for Best Fiction. She's a Kimbilio Fellow, former board member of James River Writers, and a tall poppy writer. Originally from Philadelphia, she lives near Richmond, Virginia, with her husband and 3 children. And to learn more, you can visit her at sadeqajohnson.net. She is here to talk about her latest book, Yellow Wife. And I'm going to have Sadeqa join me now with her camera. Let me see here and get her on. Maybe in a minute. There she is.
There we are.
Hi, lovely. How are you?
How are you? Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor and a pleasure to be here.
We're so excited to have you. As I was telling Sadeqa earlier, this is my first introduction to her work, Yellow Wife, and I'm so excited to read more of your stories, and you have such a gift for storytelling. You've been in the publishing world for a little while, so that's how we know of you, but now you've been an author, and I'm so delighted to introduce more people to your work with this one and your previous novels, and just keep people reading. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you start by telling us, not everybody is familiar, this book is still rather new. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Yellow Wife, summary, and let us know. Let's start there.
Okay. All right. So Yellow Wife, this is my 4th novel. It's my first historical. I've written 3 contemporary novels, and so This is the first time that I have taken the leap, I would say, into historical fiction. And it's the story of a mulatto girl. Her name is Phoebe Dolores Brown, and she's 17 when the story opens. She lives on a plantation. Her father is the master of the plantation, and her mother is his favorite slave. She is the medicine woman on the plantation as well as the seamstress. So Phoebe has been set aside from the others on the plantation. She's been favored. The master's sister never married and she didn't have children. And so she's taken Phoebe under her wing. She's taught her how to read and to write, and she's taught her to play piano. And Phoebe has been promised freedom on her 18th birthday. So she's always known her whole entire life that she was going to be free on her 18th birthday. But a series of events happen and things don't quite work out the way she planned it. And she finds herself thrust into the middle of Richmond, in one of the most despicable places on earth, which is the Lumpkins Jail. And the jail is the epicenter for slaves as they pass through Richmond. It's a punishing center. It's also a place for trading. And the owner of the jail takes an interest in Phoebe right away. And so she spends her time there trying to survive, trying to figure out how to really adapt to this new life. And she has to make some really tough decisions on a daily basis for herself and for her family.
Yeah, it's a very man, she has such a strong voice. That's what I keep going back to. When I was reading this book, Phoebe, it's told from her perspective. And I would love to give it a little bit of insight on how you discovered her voice, how you developed her voice as she ages through this book as well, with everything that happens to her. How did you tap into that as a writer and discover her voice?
Just in discovering the actual story, it really happened by accident. I do believe as writers, stories choose us. I do. So what happened was we had only lived in Virginia. I'm originally from Philadelphia, and my family and I moved to Virginia from New Jersey. And so we were here for about 6 months, and we had some friends come down to visit. And we were really just looking for an activity that we can do with the kids and as families. So we decided to go on the Richmond Slave Trail, which is along the James River. And there's 17 markers along the river, and it kind of details the passage of the slaves into Richmond, different things that happened to them. And the children were reading the different markers to us as we were moving along the James River. And I remember we got to a particular marker, and it talked about the Lumpkins Jail. And it said that the Lumpkins Jail was a punishing center for over 200,000 slaves over a 10-12 year period. And the owner of the jail, his name was Robert Lumpkin. And they said that he was like one of the meanest, most treacherous men on earth. His nickname was Bully Trader. But the thing that really got me is that it said he was married to Mary Lumpkin, who was a Black woman, and they had these 5 children together, which they raised. So the first thing that kind of stuck out for me was that he was married to a Black woman. I knew that interracial relationships was against the law in the 1800s, and so that was the first part that kind of stood out. The second thing was it said that he was the bully trader, so he was really mean, but he was married to a Black woman and he loved her and took care of their children. I thought, what a contradiction. Like, who is this man? And then I really started to think about who Mary Lumpkin was, because did she love him? Was she just there? Was she just surviving? Like, what was it like for her being with him in this place where her fellow enslaved people were punished and killed and, separated from their families? And then what in the world was it like for these children, And so those were the thoughts that was kind of circling my head. And I like to say that the story just kind of bit me. We got back in the car. We drove a little bit ahead on the trail. We ended up on the spot where the actual Lumpkins Jail was. So it's like a parking lot at this point. But I could feel this energy. And next to the parking lot, there was the African burial grounds, because when these slaves died, there was no ceremony. And so basically they waited for the bodies to pile up, and they literally just threw them into the ground. And so this was a sacred land. but the energy was there. And it was so strong that even the children felt it. And so we were just kind of there. And I felt like, my friend pretended that he was playing the African drums, and the kids started to dance and everybody started to move. It was sort of like like a homecoming, like a celebration, like the ancestors were waiting for us. And for me as a writer, it felt like they were waiting for me, and they got in the car with me, and I felt like they came home, and I just got online and I just started Googling information about the Lumpkins Jail and Mary Lumpkins. And before I knew it, it was like I had all this information, and it was this voice in me saying, wow, you should write the story. But it was also this other voice saying, yeah, but you know nothing about writing historical fiction. You're a contemporary fiction writer, So that was the tricky part. But I had a friend who came to the house, and I was telling her, and I'm telling her how passionate I am about this story. But I'm like, I am so afraid of it. And she said, Sadeqa, the thing that scares you the most is what you're supposed to write about next. And that's what opened the gate and started the story of Yellow Wife for me.
That's a good friend right there. That's somebody who knows you and who knows how to push you creatively. And then we got this beautiful story out of it. So you talked about you just went and started Googling, right? But obviously there had to be more of a research process when it came to delving into the details and really capturing the atmosphere of that time period and of Virginia specifically. What did your research process look like while you were writing?
Yeah, so I have 3 children. And so I grabbed my 2 daughters and I made them my research assistants. You got to put the kids to work. You got to bring them.
They're learning. That's huge.
Exactly. So I made them my assistants, and I dragged them to different plantations in Virginia. And basically we went on the plantation tours. We took notes, we took pictures, I asked questions. And so I really tried to keep my research very specific to Virginia, because slavery in Virginia is going to be different than New Orleans, than South Carolina, North Carolina. It's going to be a different story. And there's so many different rabbit holes that I kept finding myself jumping down, going away from the story I was trying to tell. So I tried to be really specific about it, because there's so many stories that are fascinating, that we don't know. We don't learn these in school. It's not in our history books. And so once you start digging, you realize how much is really left out. We luckily live not far from the Library of Virginia. So I spent hours at that library printing off periodicals, newspapers, magazines, things that happened in that time, so that I can get the structure of the way Richmond was laid out. I also did a lot of reading of slave narratives. And when you talk about the voice of Phoebe, I think that voice became really strong for me when I was reading books by enslaved people, and not just the history books. Because when you read a history book, there's a lens there, right? So there's like a lens that the story is filtered through. But when I'm reading the narratives of people who actually lived it, such as The Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacob. There was a book by Charles Ball that I read. And then there was just there were just sections of their stories in some of the books that I had found. And that is really what brought that voice to mind. That's what brought the character alive for me.
I love hearing that, because also, like you said, there's a difference between the history books and then the narratives that our world has been able to bring into light and been able to save over that time period. And thank you for bringing it back to the characters and the voice. Was there any other characters that you brought into the story that were based on either people that you noticed in your research, or specific narratives that you pulled from? Was there any other characters other than Phoebe and obviously her, the lead man at the jail, that you might have pulled into the story?
Yeah, so her boyfriend in the story, his name is Essex Henry, and Essex was actually based on Anthony Burns, who was a slave who escaped slavery in Virginia and ended up in Massachusetts. And he was there living his life. They went and actually, the law went to pick him up under the Fugitive Slave Act, brought him back to Virginia, and he was brought to what the Lumpkins Jail, and he was in a room. They barely fed him. He was shackled and chained for 4 months, and it was one of the most horrific situations in all of the time of the jail. And in the stories that I read about him, it said that the actual Mary Lumpkins took pity on him, and she had given him a hymnal to keep him comfort, like to give him some comfort while he was there. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what if I create some sort of love triangle after that? And so that kind of is what sparked the energy for the Essex Henry character. And then there's scenes in the book where Phoebe starts to have friends. Some of the other women who are with jailers, those women actually existed. I was able to find like Karina Hinton and her husband. Their stories were in some of these books. And so I thought, let me honor as many people as I can and tell as many stories as I can through this lens and bring them all in. So I did try to stay close to truth where I could, but the book is fiction. I mean, it is a huge amount of my imagination and just inspiration from different sources that I read.
Right. It's historical fiction for that reason. But at the same time, you're able to pull from those historical references and pull from those real life stories and create such a real atmosphere when you're reading it, which is just delicious in historical fiction. Truly, it makes it all the more harrowing and interesting, and just it makes you dive into it. I want to ask a little bit about your writing process and how the transfer from a contemporary writer to historical fiction. You're still a storyteller, right? So there's still those baselines and those things you know how to do, and obviously you're a reader too. But what were some differences that you noticed, or some tricks that you learned along the way while transferring genres?
It really is the details is in the history. So bringing those historical facts into the story, really understanding my setting. I really had to world build in this story in a way that I had not before. So much so that I started with a collage on my writing wall, which I had never done before, but I printed off pictures of plantations, and I printed off pictures of what I thought Phoebe looked like and what I thought Essex would look like and what the jail looked like. Actually, I printed off pictures of the actual jail. And if you look at inside your copy of the book, there is, oh yes,
I have an arc. Oh, darn. But that's awesome.
But yeah, so we were able to use the actual picture of the jail for our end papers for the book. And so I had this hanging up in my office. So all those little things helped with the world building. The other thing is that I needed to know like how it smelled and what they dressed like and what they ate. And so it was all these little small details that I think made the difference. Then it separated me from when I was writing contemporary fiction, when it was just like they ate what I ate. I was making, salmon and string beans, but no, they ate. And Yellow Wife, they had mutton stew and sweetbread. And, so just getting those details down, I think is really what transformed the book into being a historical fiction story.
Absolutely. And I I love hearing about your board. That's one of the coolest things, and you sound very visual in how you learn and how you talk about things. But I want to know, does any of that visual learning or board come into when you're plotting or when you're planning, or do you write by the seat of your pants? What does that look like when you're plotting the story and how it's going to come out
Yeah, the first novel I wrote, Love in a Carry-On Bag, that book was seat of my pants, and it took me over 10 years to finish. So I think I learned my lesson. I need a little bit more of a roadmap. So from Second House, from the corner to And Then There Was Me to Yellow Wife, I started to outline my stories. So basically what I do when I get an idea, I start to think about it. I journal an awful lot. So in the beginning, I'm just journaling my ideas down. And then it gets to the point where I think I have somewhat of a story. So my agent actually will let me talk the whole thing out, almost like kind of like a throw up session. And so I call her, we're on the phone for like an hour, and I literally just throw up in her ears, telling her every single thing I think needs to happen in the story. And then I kind of get her juices flowing, and she says, okay, go write an outline or write a synopsis. And that's kind of the beginning. I start writing the synopsis, and then it goes from 2 pages to 5 pages to 10 pages to 15 pages. And then I separate it. I need to know what happens in part 1, part 2, and part 3. I'm definitely a 3-part writer. My background, I went to college for theater. And so I think did you? You went to college for theater as well? Twinsies.
I know. Well, we'll have to touch on that and how that influences storytelling, but please continue.
I think that's probably why I'm a 3-part writer, because when you think about plays, it's always act 1, act 2, act 3. And so that's the way I write. And then I just get going.
Well, that being said, why books? What touches you about that type of storytelling, knowing now that you have a background in theater, and what is it about books that captures your writing style and that makes you want to tell stories in that format?
I think it goes back to my childhood, to be quite honest. I was such an avid reader as a kid. I was the girl who went to the library on Mondays and checked out 7 books, and I read a book a day. So much so, I can't tell you what happened in 7th grade math, because I would take my Sweet Valley High books to school, slip them behind my math book, and the whole time he was teaching whatever he was teaching, I was like just reading. And so I think the novel writing came from loving to read longer pieces. I was never a short story reader. I don't even know how to write a short story, to be honest. I've never done it, because I've always read novels, and that's always kind of the way my brain works. When I was a little bit younger, I would write poetry. I went to college in New York, and so I was hanging out with the hip kids, and I was going to like Nuyorican Cafe and getting on stage and putting my acting and my writing together and like spitting poetry, So, I was having those Love Joan moments, which was a lot of fun. But then when I started to write my first novel, it just felt like that was what I was supposed to do. And then I got the job in publishing. So I was working at Scholastic Books. I was there. I actually worked on the first 3 Harry Potter books.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, so it was like I worked on Harry Potter before it was Harry Potter, But like all of those experiences really lent itself to me being a fiction writer.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm sure you and Roz have some stories. Roz is our Scholastic rep. And so I love hearing that history and how it delved into just your life and how it influenced you so early. What were some of the books, other than Sweet Valley High, what were some of the ones that you remember reading that have stuck out to you?
When I was really small, it was definitely Judy Blume, of course, Joanna Hurwitz. Those were some of the like younger books I remember. But then when I got to high school, I was introduced to Maya Angelou. So, I read her whole autobiography. I think it's 4 or 5 books in the series. I still have those books. And I would read them with like, I was so into him. I had a girlfriend in high school who she would just run up to me and snatch my books, because she was like, no, come play. It's lunchtime.
Dude.
I would have to like hide out to read my books. And so I was reading like Maya Angelou. And I would say the first story that really, really touched me was Mama by Terry McMillan. When I read that book, it was like I could see myself on the page. I mean, everything about that book just woke me up. And it was so vivid in my imagination, and it was so strong in my soul that it was the first book that I actually read 2 times. So I read it twice. So those were kind of the authors who started to, speak to me. Eric Jerome Dickey and B.B. Moore Campbell. Those were authors that I loved in the beginning when I was like reading as a teen.
That's amazing. What are you reading now? What media is helping you through this pandemic right now?
Oh my gosh. So I just finished reading, I had to take a break. So all the research for Yellow Wife, I was working on the book for 3 years. So just imagine,
oh my gosh, wow,
on the beach reading about slavery. I mean, it just, everybody's reading beach books, and I'm reading, this hardcore book. And so I needed to like kind of, once the book was off and I knew I was finished, I kind of needed to switch genres for a bit. So I've been reading a little bit of mystery, which was not my thing before, but I'm enjoying it. So I just finished Attica Locke.
Oh yes,
Highway 59 series. Oh my gosh, the craft. Oh my gosh, she's so good. So just sometimes I'm like rereading the page. I'm listening to Kate Quinn's book, The Alice Network. I was actually
Oh, yes.
so good, so good. And I'm also now reading books. So I've been asked now to start blurbing books because, which is a wonderful thing. So now I'm getting advanced books. And so right now I'm reading a book that's coming out in July, which is historical fiction. And it's similar to Yellow Wife in the sense that it's a it's a slave story, but it's a Caribbean slave story, which is completely different, but in the same deal. And it's called Island Queen by Vanessa Riley, which is so good so far. I'm like 70 pages in. So I'm trying to read a little bit of everything now, just to kind of open my brain up a bit, you know?
Well, and for those who may not know, a blurb is the wonderful quotes that we get on the books from other authors, like the wonderful you got here from Kathleen Grissom. Yes, that's how you say her name. But that's what a blurb is for those who might not know. But that's really exciting. That's always a really fun ask in an author's career. So as much, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was just so honored. I'm like, yeah, thanks.
Well, but I want to ask, has any other stories grabbed your attention? Are you working on something new? Or are you really needing a break from this one? Can you give us a hint if you can't talk about it?
I can't say much, but I actually had to start working on another book. First of all, when I don't write, I'm super cranky. So I had to write something. I have to feel productive. I mean, promoting Yellow Wife has been taking up so much of my time. So I'm not writing as much as I was before the book came out. I'm so excited to say that this week, Yellow Wife became an international bestseller. It debuted at number 9 on the Globe and Mail in Canada, so which is really, really exciting. And so
congratulations! Yay!
Thank you. That's been keeping me like flying like all week. I've been really busy with that, but I am writing, just not as much as I want to. I'm working on another historical fiction, not as far back this time. I decided to bring it into the 1900s. So I'm looking at like the 1950s. I love writing about strong women. I love writing about love. I love writing about characters that have something like this big surmountable thing that they have to overcome because they're going to be stronger once they get to the other side. And so I'm writing this story about these two women. And you know, it'll have all that Sadeqa flavor that you've come to know. And
Yes.
yeah, that's what I'm working on.
I'm very excited. I will have to keep my eyes out for an arc, which is why some people are always confused when I hold up the paperback. This is a pre-copy. You can, when you go buy it, it will be in hardcover, I promise. Yes, the beautiful finished copy she has there. So I want to turn it over to our audience questions. They've been active in the chat so far. And one of the ones I wanted to ask you gets a little bit more into research. And so which, if any, archives did you use for the research? You mentioned Virginia library in Virginia that you talked to, but were there any others that maybe you went into or any specifics you want to mention?
No, it was just the Library of Virginia because I really wanted to keep it the Virginia story. So that was primarily what I focused on because even I had traveled to Charleston while I was writing the book for vacation, and we went to visit Charleston plantations, and I went on a few tours. That story was completely different. And so I really needed to keep my focus on Virginia so that I wouldn't get too far off track because it was just so different. So one of the things that I learned in my research was that, and I talk about it in Yellow Wife, that slaves who lived in Richmond, because it was the city, they were able to hire themselves out. And that was not something that I had found kind of in the countryside stories. But in Richmond, masters would make more money by letting their slaves go to town, hire themselves out for the day or the week with a note, and bring the money back home to them. And so that was something that was very specific to Richmond.
Interesting. Essex ends up doing that, right? He does that, yeah. Or in the beginning, kind of. Well, anyway.
Yeah, yes.
I won't say that much. So someone else wants to know, how did you decide on the title Yellow Wife?
So when I was doing my research, the owner of the Lumpkins Jail, which the story is based off of, my story is called the Tattered Jail. But the owner, he said in his will, he said, I leave all of my real estate and my fortune to my yellow wife. And then he left some other things to his Black concubine, because of course he had more than one woman in real life. And so he was divvying it up. And that's the way he separated them, because his wife was mulatto and she was, fair skinned. And so he referred to her as his yellow wife. And so when I read that, I thought, oh my gosh, that is really, really interesting. I said, I'm just going to jot it down. And so I called the story Yellow Wife, but I'm always, I really trust my team. I trust my agents and my editors and Simon and Schuster. And so my thought is always, if when it gets to that point and they want to change the title, I am open. But when it got to them, they were like, oh, we love it. So it was able to stick. Yeah.
No, which again, for some people who might not know, in the publishing world, often editors and agents will have a say when it comes to title. So that's really also, it's kind of unique that it kept the same title throughout. Often it goes through a couple of different drafts and iterations.
And the funny thing is that's happened with all of my books. All of my books, I've always been completely open, and every single title I came up with, all 4 titles stuck.
That means you have a knack for it. I think that says something about your knowledge and your intuition right there, I think. So you were giving such great book recommendations before. Do you have any more that you want to share, or a book that you believe every person should have to read?
That is a really good question.
Other than Yellow Wife, of course.
Say every person should read The Yellow Wife and tell at least 3 friends about it.
Yes.
But if you're also just interested in this genre of historical fiction pre-Civil War, books that I absolutely loved, that I found quite helpful in my research, I read The Known World by Edward P. Jones, Winch by Dolan Perkins Valdez, The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grisham, and I also really loved Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. So those were some books, and the Lisa Wingate book is not really set in that period, but for some reason it was able to evoke some emotion out of me that helped me with my story.
That's an important part too. When you're comparing books, it's not always genre based, it's sometimes feeling based.
Exactly.
Too.
Yeah.
So here's another question. As an African American woman, BA English Literature Creative Writing. The speaker, as an African American woman with a BA in English Literature Creative Writing, with a background in publishing, poetry, and internship, how do I get in the front door to start a career in publishing?
Ooh. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So my knowledge of publishing, and for me, I was actually living in New York City at the time when I got into publishing. And I'm sure, and I was in publishing in the 90s. So I'm sure the game has changed tremendously. I know that my publicist has a master's in publishing. And so I think now those programs were not there, or at least I wasn't aware of them when I started in publishing in the late 90s. But most of the publishing houses, to my knowledge, are based in New York City. Now everything is virtual. So I'm pretty sure that they're, hiring people all over. I think, if you know someone in publishing, I always like to say that it's really easy to use your resources. Like for me, anything that I want to do, I try and use my resources. And so I try and make a list, like even now, just in doing the publicity for Yellow Wife, I'm thinking, okay, who do I know who may have a connection at O Magazine? Who do I know who may know someone there? Like just kind of making a list of who I know, because you would be really surprised that you are always just a few degrees separation from somebody who knows something that can help you. So the first thing I would say is use your resources. And then the second thing is just go on their websites and see, I'm not quite sure where she lives, but just see if they are hiring people who are not in New York City or in LA. And, maybe there's some things that you can do virtually. The other thing about publishing that I'm finding is that, they have all these online job sites like Upwards, where you can just kind of get your feet wet in doing publishing jobs for, smaller companies and people of that nature. And you just put your information up and you can get jobs that way as well. Good luck. Working in publishing was a lot of fun. I wish you well.
I also want to clarify, she did put MLIS equals librarian. I didn't know what that meant, and so I skipped over it, so I apologize. But yes, it's a librarian degree. Thank you, Amy, for clarifying. Also, you can always try and get a job in an independent bookstore. That's helped learn a huge amount about publishing and allows you to transfer over easily. as Sadeqa mentioned, there are websites and stuff too, like shelfawareness.com has postings, Publisher Weekly, Lunch. There's a lot of different options there. If you ever want to talk, you can email anybody at Tattered Cover. We'll talk about publishing literally all day long. And if you're in Denver, the Denver Publishing Institute is a really great place to get started as well. I don't know if you know that, but in Denver, the University of Denver has a whole mini course, a mini certificate that you can get that's in publishing, which is really nice.
Really awesome.
Yeah, a lot of my fellow staff members have gotten their degrees there and then came to work at Tattered. So lots of options. Let's see here. What other questions can we ask? Oh, what advice? Well, we're asking advice at this point. What advice do you have for someone wanting to write historical fiction?
Cool. My advice to writers in general is the first thing you have to do is just make that appointment with yourself to actually start writing. I get that question a lot. What do I do? How do I start? My writing teacher used to tell me 20 minutes before bed. You don't have to quit your job to write a novel. If you just start with 20 minutes before bed, before you know it, you're starting the discipline of showing up for yourself, showing up for your writing, and then the momentum will increase. So you go from 20 minutes to 30 minutes. 30 minutes turns into an hour. And before you know it, you're writing 2 hours a night and you're starting to see that manuscript form. For historical fiction writers, I would say read as much as you can the type of book that you want to write, just so that you can start to get the sense of like what the world feels like, and, to get that voice in your head. You're not going to end up, sometimes the danger for people is, I don't want to read what I'm writing because I don't want to plagiarize. And I don't think that's what happens. I think you're just inspired. So I would say try and read things that are in the same vein of what you want to write and get that discipline down. I make appointments with myself because otherwise it's really difficult for me to write. So I literally wake up and I write out my schedule. I'm going to wake up at this time. I'm going to pray and meditate. I'm going to write from this to this. I'm going to I have to lay it out for myself, or otherwise it's just it might not happen. So make that appointment with yourself the same way you would do anything else.
I love that. I love my color coding brain just got really happy, that idea of scheduling out time and the fact that you call it an appointment. It's something that feels outside of yourself. It feels like that's something you have to do. It's an obligation rather than just, oh, I think I'm gonna write, maybe. Another really great question is, let me see, just read this. Okay, so in your history in publishing, how was the transition into being a writer? I think it's more like, what did you learn from publishing that helped you be a writer, is what I think I'm reading.
Yeah, it was an amazing, working in publishing was a really, really hard job. I was young, I was learning, and I had bosses that were really strict. So, I came up in publishing in a time where there was a certain way to do things. And if you didn't do it that way, then you were out the door. So I was always kind of on my toes. But it really taught me the business of, publishing. I always like to say that I got into publishing once I decided I wanted to be a writer, that I got into publishing so that when I got to the other side of the table, I would already understand the way everything works, right? I always feel like you can't pull the wool over my eyes because I've already been behind the curtain. So I know how this thing works. But it also taught me a lot. So I think one of the things that my editor and my publicist likes is that I am a partner in promoting this book. I am bringing my knowledge and my experience and my Rolodex to the table, and we're sharing ideas. I'm not only relying on them to say, this is what you need to do. I'm actively participating in the promotion of the book. And so I think that is one of the big things that has helped. When I used to hang out with writers, because I did have the privilege of driving in town cars to the Today Show with Catherine Coulter and Nevada Barr and T.D. Jakes and Amy Tan and, all of those big New York Times bestselling authors. And I was this young, wet behind the ears girl, but I would ask them questions like, what's your writing schedule like? How do you get it done? And so I was constantly picking their brains so that I could bring that over into my life as a writer and try and emulate what I saw them doing because they were successful. And that is all I wanted, was to be successful.
I love that you were using your resources. That's exactly what you were doing, what you talked about earlier. It's the same thing that you were doing then. That's awesome. What do your daughters think of the book, knowing now that they were your research assistants?
Well, can I tell you, my kids are not impressed by me, like, at all.
Only because they're your kids.
Are so unimpressed. I mean, it really sometimes I'm like, my son is 17. And so I asked him when when I had the arc, I said, honey, can you read my book? He says, Mom, I'm really busy right now. Maybe I can read it over summer break. I was like, oh, okay. And then my daughter is 15. So this is the first time I've actually asked her to read a book, because before she was too young, contemporary fiction, it's a little bit more juicy, some scenes that I might not want her to read. I'm like, could you read my book? And she's like, well, I have to read what's the Stephanie Meyer's series?
Twilight?
Twilight series. So she's on, like, I think she's on the fourth or the fifth book. She's like, well, I still have like 2 books left in the Twilight series. So let me get through that and we'll see how it goes. So yeah.
Oh
Not super impressed, not excited I mean, they give me high fives, when I made the bestsellers list. I get the high fives and the go mom, but like that's kind of it.
no. Well, I think a lot of people are going to like it a lot better than vampires. So thank you for That's so funny. Did they enjoy that time with you though, and learning and researching? This is my own question knowing, but like, how was that experience together, and the passing on that knowledge to another generation? What was that like, and how'd it go?
Yeah, I think, in the moments when we were actually out there doing the research and I was kind of giving them little jobs and and asking questions so that they could understand it, or explaining things to them in the way that they would understand, it was invaluable. Like that's something and we have pictures. And so I think it's something that they will cherish and remember when they get to the point where they're not so like, you're just my mom, like when they get to the other side. But I do think that it was a really important time for us, as a family to have experienced that as well. And the fact that they were on the slave trade with us. I mean, they were on the slave trail when I discovered Yellow Wife. And so that moment they remembered. And we actually went back after I discovered the story. I had not gone back to the trail. I literally just did the research and I used my imagination. But just recently, about November or so, my publisher wanted to do like a book trailer. And so they asked me to go back and take some videos. So packed them up again, took them down, made them like cameras and, do things for me. And they really enjoyed that. So I do think it's that full circle moment for them, but I think they'll really appreciate it a couple more years down the line.
Yeah, instead of this is my mom, they'll be like, this is my mom. They'll be very excited about it.
And my book is like on the to be read, list or something in college. Then they'll be like, this is my mom.
I have the source. I can get all the research materials. Exactly.
Yes.
So I want to close out by asking this question, which is one of my favorites to ask authors. What did this book teach you, either about yourself as a writer, a fact that you didn't know about before that you want to share, something about history, your life? What did this book teach you? What did you learn from it?
So the first thing it taught me is that I can literally do anything that I put my mind to. Like if I put an intention on something and put my energy there, I can absolutely get it done, because I was so afraid of transitioning from contemporary to historical. I was so afraid of the story. As much as I loved reading historical fiction, I just didn't know that I could do it. So just the fact that I could really do anything that I put my mind to is one of the biggest lessons. The other thing is that as I was doing my research and reading about Mary Lumpkins and women who were like her, what I really learned is that women, we are so resilient, and that women of that time had to go through so much just to survive, just to eat, just to make it through the day. And so there's nothing in my life right now that, is anywhere near the level of what they had to overcome. And so I have nothing to be ungrateful about, that I have to meet every single day with a measure of gratitude, because it is such a privilege to live in this time, in this moment, even though it's not comfortable. We can't go out the house. This is virtual. And I would love to be at Tattered Cover Bookstore, smelling the books and hugging the people. But there's nothing that is is so bad that I can't be in a place of gratitude. You know, we stand on their shoulders. I honored them with this story. I hope I did a good job, you know, because if it wasn't for the sacrifices of people like Phoebe Dolores Brown and the characters that I created based on real people, we wouldn't be here right now. And so, you know, that was a big moment for me to embrace that.
Well, my opinion means very little, but I think you did an amazing job. Being on the the bestseller list internationally means that other people believe that you did a good job, and I know that the readers that have been asking questions are going to believe that you did a good job too. And hopefully one day this will be on college reading lists, because it's that good and it's that important, and it was told by the right writer, and so I'm glad that the story came to you. So thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for following that path, because you could have said no. You could have just been like, I'm going to do something else. So thank you for, you know, working through the fear and giving us this brilliant story. I know that there's going to be a lot of people that are very grateful for it. And your kids one day will be too.
Thank you so much. It's been such a joy. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I know you can be doing anything on a Saturday night. Well, not quite anything, right? Because we're semi on lockdown.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful that you chose to come tonight. Please go out and get a copy of Yellow Wife. Tell a friend, tell a book club friend. I love meeting with book clubs. You can find information about me on my website, sadeqajohnson.net. I'm on Instagram, Sadeqa Says, also on Twitter and Facebook. I would love to hear from you. Please reach out to me and make sure you get a copy of the book. Thank you.
So excited. She doesn't even you are so good at pitching your book. You're not kidding about being a partner with your publisher. I'm like, I don't even have to be like, Sadeqa, I want to give you a moment to tell people where they can find you online and how they can. No, you've got it. You've nailed it. Thank you. And she's not wrong, guys. You guys can get copies of Yellow Wife at tatteredcover.com or support your local independent bookstore. I know that there's been people from all over the nation here watching tonight. So
copies. So Tattered Covered has I had some book plates, some signed book plates, just for you guys. So definitely reach out and get a copy of your book.
Yes, so you can order that online, or you can come into any one of our locations if you're in the Denver metro area. Again, being safe, social distancing, and wearing your mask, and only about 90 minutes or so in the store. I want to thank you guys again for joining us and for continuing to support local businesses. It's dinner time for a lot of you right around now. Maybe you want to reach out to a local mom and pop restaurant and support them with DoorDash or something like that tonight. Think about that, and we thank you guys again. Sadeqa, if you'll stay around while I close this out here tonight. I'm McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading. Bye, all. And we're out.